Someone please take your seats and please pay attention to the chair. Thank you.
Get started. Everyone is ready. Order. Please take the roll.
Hamilton. Mr. Napolitano.
Here.
Mr. Cantella.
Here.
Mr. Del Tufo.
Excuse.
Mr. Arcudi.
Here.
Mr. Smith.
Here.
Dr. Marchese.
Here.
Ms. Pandora. Here. Mr. Kazira.
Here.
Commissioner Scarpelli.
Here.
Mayor Tucci.
Here.
Mr. Quintella, would you please sit for Mr. Del Tufo? Pursuant to the requirements of the Open Public Meetings Act, notice of this meeting was included in the annual notice of the regular meeting of 2022 as advertised in the Star Ledger, Herald Tribune, and Nutley Sun, 7/9/2021. With a copy posted on campus and delivered to workers for town hall. Copies filed in the office of the township clerk, and copies are available to all members of the general public. Have you all had a chance to review the minutes from our last meeting? If so,
Move to approve
is there a
minutes.
second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any abstentions or opposed? Thank you. Mr. Kazira, any communications or bills?
I have one bill for submission this evening. It's from Ms. Santacieri for her attendance at preparation of the meeting minutes, which were just approved for April 6, 2022. It's in the amount of $150, which I find to be fair and reasonable.
Is there a motion to approve?
Move to
Is there
approve.
a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Abstentions, opposed? Thank you. Any old business to come before the board? If not, we'll discuss some new business. We have a hearing scheduled for 285 Nutley Avenue for a final major subdivision, and that's scheduled for May 4th. And we also have a hearing scheduled for 200 Metro Bulletin Boulevard, Building 200, the SI Corporation, and that's also scheduled for May 4th. Hopefully, we'll get to hear both of them that evening. We have a continuation of 443 Harrison Street that is possibly scheduled for June 15th. And we have something coming up at 200 Highfield Lane, and we will set the date for that once we've received all of the materials. We can now proceed to our business for this evening, which is our combined meeting with the Planning Board, Zoning Board, Board of Ed, and commissioners. So I would like to start by having everyone introducing him or herself, and please state what board you're on. We can start at this side of the room.
Lisa Danchard Martin, Board of Education Trustee.
Nicholas Scotty, Board of Education Trustee.
Charlie Kuzinski, Nutley Board of Education.
Danny Carnasella, another Board of Education trustee.
Sal Farrow, Nutley Board of Education.
He's the school business administrator.
Kent Banian, Acting Superintendent. Dave Scheidel, Zoning Board.
Greg Tolby, zoning board. Dan Fresno, zoning board.
Yvette Wallace, zoning board. Lori Castro, zoning board. Patricia Doherty, zoning board. Teresa Duba, zoning board. Diana McGovern, zoning board attorney.
Frank Graziano, zoning board chairman.
Carol Tangora, Planning Board Chairperson.
Barry Kazira, counsel to the planning board. Mark Arcudi, planning board.
Lorraine Kaczynski, planning board.
Frank Cantella, Planning Board.
Linda Hamilton, planning board.
Larry Marchese, Planning Board.
Walt Smith, planning board.
Anthony Malpatano, planning board. Jonathan Bruno, township attorney.
Al Petracco, Commissioner of Public Safety.
Joe Scarpelli, Commissioner of Public Works and a member of the Planning Board. Mauro Tucci, Mayor, Commissioner of Parks and Public Property and member of the Planning Board.
Tom Evans, Commissioner, Revenue and Finance.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. It's nice to have everybody here this evening. What I would like to do is proceed with our zoning board report.
Mayor, Commissioners, member of the Planning Board, members of the Board of Education. It's a pleasure to be back in person this year. Year 2021 was a busy one for the zoning board. As you can see, we reviewed 59 cases as compared to 41 in 2020. Of those 59 cases, 30 with conditions. Zoning board assessed for the interpretation of zoning ordinance on 4 occasions. Meetings went late to the evening and the board members worked very hard to make sure that every application is thoroughly reviewed. Based upon trends that we've seen in the applications that have come before the zoning board this year, it is our recommendation that ordinances need to be reviewed by the planning board and board of commissioners and of the following: air conditioner condensers and a side yard are frequently a subject of a variance application. The current ordinance requires that a minimum 6-foot side yard must be unencumbered. We find many applications presented to us where the properties have less than 6 feet on the side, but the only reasonable place for a condenser is in the 6-foot setback. We suspect the reason for this limitation was due to noise. We know that new units do not create the noise that was once generated from old units. We think that perhaps a formula could be worked out to allow for installation of units within less than 6 feet by permit only, and without the need for a variance, especially if there's enough room for them to pass through. That might be other conditions. Drainage concerns are an issue with new construction. We know that 1 and 2 family homes are not subject to site plan review, but we also know that some additions can cause drainage issues, and some study to minimum drainage requirements for all new construction and additions should be reviewed, such as requiring stormwater retention systems if an addition creates a certain percentage of impervious coverage, regardless of what the addition would be within the allowable total lot coverage. We are experiencing a lot more flooding in today's days, and due to climate change, so we feel that we should probably get a little bit more proactive in front of this problem. When we get new applications for apartments or mixed-use buildings, where we do site plan review, there are no ordinances that mandate charging stations for electric vehicles. And also with respect to apartments and mixed use, the requirements regarding space for garbage and recycling areas appear to be insufficient for the present and growing needs for recycling and refuse generated by the average person. For example, Amazon, a lot of people do a lot of Amazon deliveries. I'm sure you all realize that. So probably making a lot more cardboard right now. Again, with respect to apartments and mixed use buildings, we know that more and more people are shopping online and deliveries are increasing. We would recommend that some requirement for delivery parking, loading, and unloading be required. We also were looking to maybe get some more guest spaces in mixed use and apartments. We also had mentioned in the past some fast food and takeout clarification should be made in the code. And as I noted in the beginning, we had 4 instances where we were asked to review ordinances. 2 of those reviews had to do with truck terminals and warehouses. We would recommend that the planning board review the code definitions of warehouses and truck terminals. Again, considering the ever-increasing use of deliveries by people for everything from home goods, clothes, and food that they need for quick deliveries. We know this is a trend that is going to embark in the future. Finally, there was one other interpretation that the board was asked to review, and that had to do with curb cuts, curb cut widths. The section that limits curb cut widths to no greater than 20 feet in any zone is part of section 700-94 that is titled Additional Regulations on Off-Street Parking for 1 and 2 family dwellings. Perhaps the title should be modified. That came into play in one of our interpretations as well.
It's also the subject of litigation.
And I welcome any questions you may have about the matters considered by the board as set forth in the report provided by you. As I say every year, keep the questions easy.
Questions from the planning board? Zoning board? Those are very valid points. Commission,
I
yes.
have a couple questions. Mr. Chairman, when you talk about detention basins,
Yes.
can you, without an ordinance, can you suggest that they do it, especially if they're increasing the impervious coverage?
We can do it, and we did do it on one case. It come in with a 50-year flood requirement that they were gonna go with, and we said, no, why don't you go with 100? Rains aren't decreasing, they're increasing. But I think if we had it in our ordinance, it probably would be better. They would need an engineer to figure this stuff out.
Because we're at 70% impervious coverage on most of our zones, which we talked, the planning board talked about looking at that, possibly, decrease the impervious coverage, maybe to 60.
That's probably a great idea.
We obviously have to look at the ramifications, but with, as you mentioned, with the increased flooding that we've seen, they have to reduce the runoff in some way. And the same thing for the recycle, like the delivery trucks. Can you, without the ordinance, you can still ask them to put that in, can't you?
We probably could, but not according to the ordinances. They're bound by, handicap parking for the occupants. There's no requirement for visitors. So we're deliveries, so by having it in the code would help.
Certainly some things for the planning board and the commissioners to consider.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mayor.
Yes, Mr. Graziano. You spoke about air conditioning setbacks, all right, and they're presently what, 6 feet from the property line? Are you considering decreasing that setback?
We get a lot of cases where we do decrease that setback. And one of the things we look at is the distance that there will be left over. As long as somebody or firemen or safety people need to get back there. We don't want it so that, it's blocking the passage. But we do approve it because it's, most of the times, it's maybe not the only place, but the best place to put it.
Right.
So that's what we're asking, that you take a look at that, maybe come up with a new idea on what we can do with that.
I have a couple of other questions that I'd like both the zoning board and the planning board to consider. First one is, I think we need to come up with a standardized color of buildings, both in the business district, all right, and residentially, all right. So we don't have eyesores going up, and I understand that's a very subjective topic, all right, but I think minus Ray Charles, most of us can see what's offensive and what doesn't fit. Okay, so I think that's something that we need to look at. Also, the names of businesses, all right, and or buildings. I haven't seen anything offensive in buildings, residential buildings yet, but in businesses, recently one has cropped up that somewhat offensive. And I'm getting calls, and I agree, all right, that offensive names should not be permitted. And I don't know how we go about doing that, being a relatively new member of the planning board and still learning, but I think that's something that both boards need to look at. And the last issue that crops up for me is residential overcrowding. All right, and I know I spoke with Dave and Commissioner Evans about this in the past, and I know we did some investigation in this area, but I think with the present housing conditions out there, I think it's something that we really need to zero in on to make sure that we don't have overcrowding. And this would also benefit the Board of Ed because, I guess their officers don't have to go out, and I know they check residency and, how many children are legally living in a home. But I think it's important that the number of people living in a home, all right, is also somewhat regulated. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just
Yes.
piggyback on what the mayor was just saying? I've had discussions with you about towns that actually do legislate colors and signs. And can you give me just an example of one of the towns that does that and how they did it?
I can't think of anything specifically right now.
Belleville has an ordinance that restricts colors on properties. On Belleville has an ordinance in their town code that discusses colors. I don't know the colors off the top of my head, but I do know that they have colors. It's like our awnings. If you look in our section on ordinance on awnings, it talks about colors. There's specific colors on awnings that's permitted. So similar to, you could maybe, use that in that context. We do it for awnings already, so why not do it for a building? Yeah.
It seems to me that that's something you can put together. It's not that complicated. You just have to figure out what our requirements would be. You have to look or an ordinance. So we have.
Sometimes it's not the color, but the shade.
And also to note, it's easier to work on, like when the boards work on a site plan and the boards work on an application, it's much easier because most times applicants present renderings to you guys and you approve renderings. So there are language in the resolutions where we can go if somebody does something crazy and changes something where we could cite somebody for changing a rendering. But where there's an application where that didn't go before a site plan, that's where the language would be helpful to assist in what kind of guidance the town wants for these kind of buildings.
Any other comments at this time? I think that, these are all topics we should take up at our next workshop. I think it would be, a very good discussion to schedule. Is there anything further?
That's all I have.
Are there any other?
Excuse me?
You can give us like the bullet points of the things that you.
Yeah, I have a couple things that I'll, when we're ready, I'll go over a few
I
items.
just want to ask one question about the requirement for electrical charging. I don't know how to feel about that. Because you're adding a financial burden to a developer or a guy who owns a multi-family house. It's like asking to put a gas station. Well, if you have a gas, you don't have gas vehicles, you don't go in your garage and fill your whole gas. Why would we require people to have to plug it into chargers?
As I understand it, the governor, I think, just signed into law. Commissioner Evans is shaking his head, yes. I think it's becoming a standard that municipalities are going to have to, whether you want to or not, respond to.
In your home?
Not in your home,
If you buy
in parking lots on new developments.
Right.
Yeah. parking
New
lots on
developments
developments.
and commercial areas, public parking lots will have to have a charging station.
Yeah, well, yes, just the future.
My car's on.
Even more perspective.
What's the next one in the next 5 years? I don't care. I'll try to bring you on.
I think with more and more electric vehicles on the road, it's just a practical thing to consider. And I know a lot of newer parking garages, they do have charging stations and parking lots as well. So I guess it's something that we really have to discuss.
That is for convenience, but a lot of times property owners are compensated for installing as well. So there is incentives. Well, they make money out of it.
Any other questions? Is there anyone from the public who has a question regarding the information that we just discussed only? Name and address for the record, please.
Rory Moore, 111 Passaic Avenue. I'd like to, the following Belleville, because recently I just there teaching at the meeting, and he said Belleville was far ahead of us. But every item that you discussed this evening so far is already in Belleville. They're already addressing, they're putting up 1,400 apartments. The one thing that you left out was a bike rack. That was a big portion of it. Where the bike racks are gonna go? And nobody's ever addressed, are we gonna put a bike lane in Nutley to accommodate all the bikes? And my final point, you said the color of the building. I'm sure everybody noticed that. But to the person who put it up, the businessman, who probably came from another country, that was a good color to him. So you have to be really conscious about when we're gonna say, this color is offensive to me. But now that the world's opening up, especially Nutley, we now have to reconsider, is it offensive to the person who put the color up? Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Madam Chair, can I just respond to a couple of things?
Yes, ma'am.
The first thing is I never said that Belleville was far ahead of us on anything. Okay, so just for the record, let's get that straight. Okay. Secondly, if we're speaking about the same property, I believe the fellow's from either Nutley or one of the surrounding towns and not a foreign country. And I agree with you. All right, one of the few times, but I do agree with you. All right, that colors and tastes are very subjective, but it needs to blend in to the area that it's in. That was my own.
Thank you. Any other comments? Anyone else? Yes, sir. State your name and address for the record, please.
Larry Quirk, 45 Hampton Place.
Thank you.
Wasn't it quite a few years ago, wasn't there a preservation committee regarding the colors of buildings?
It was like a facade committee.
Facade, right?
Yeah.
Whatever happened to that?
I don't know.
You're still an historic preservation committee that is in place.
Because I worked on the
They
building.
don't, excuse me, but they don't regulate color.
Okay, I worked on the building diagonally across from ShopRite quite a few years ago. And I forget her name, but we were restricted into certain colors and signage.
That's because, excuse me, I'm sorry, that's because there was a facade committee. And I believe there was a CBG grant that was given to certain business owners. And I believe if the business owner took the money, they had to work with the committee to come up with this color scheme. That's,
Well, I think that should be a consideration again, to prevent that building that we all know about. The other comment I wanted to make, I observed Dave's talking to you, answering your questions. What I don't understand is why isn't he or the town engineer at board meetings to answer the board's questions? He just answered your question here, but if the subject is brought up that you're unsure about in terms of zoning, I believe like every other town that I've been in, they have the zoning official there.
When we have applications before us, we do get comments in writing from the engineers and from every department that's, applicable to the application that we have.
And we do it at workshop
Yes,
sessions
right.
too.
But I know at the last meeting, Mayor Tucci brought up a question. He said this is his first time. I think it would have been advantageous for Jay to be there to answer that question.
We know where to reach him, so.
I've been to the meetings many times. Whenever I'm needed, I've hundreds of times I've been to meetings. So whenever I'm asked, I'm available for the town anytime you see here. I've been to planning and zoning board meetings, all those interpretations I did. So whenever I'm needed, I'm around.
Okay.
Thank you for your comments.
All right.
Are there any other questions? Yes, Commissioner.
You addressed the planning board for comments. Since I don't sit on the planning board, I waited. So just point of order. Is it okay for me to speak now? Or just a couple of things that I think need to be considered. The whole area of cannabis, right? Cannabis zoning regulation, since the state it's legal in the state. So obviously we opted out. There's many issues, and I think that there's a significant need for both the boards to be well educated on all of the issues. As a board, we've been learning a lot about it, and I think you should all participate in learning about the complexity and the issues. Not much, there's not many things that actually will work in Nutley per se around it. But there are a lot of implications, especially when you think about what we would allow in any type of a commercial district, especially with a school system that has 7 schools all around town. So I think learning about that while we're in the opt-out period, right before we would engage, I think there's a window, an opportunity, but I think the investment of time would be well worth the effort around that. And Jonathan Bruno, our town attorney, could give recommendations to the board on who to talk to. So that was one.
Yes.
The other is, it's all around the whole concept around, as a community, continuing to figure out ways to be greener. And so you think about the commercial areas, the commercial districts, anything that's going on. There are things that maybe we can consider. I've been made aware of the fact that Princeton has an ordinance that actually restricts the use of gas-powered leaf blowers. Because one, they're very noisy. They contribute negatively to the environment. So they actually only allow, and it was transitional, but they only allow, battery-powered blowers. And what they also found is that battery-powered blowers aren't as loud as the other blowers. So when you think about in our town, the noise that occurs, I think it sort of bleeds into a question about, as a community, as the mayor mentioned, given the density of the community, thinking about some of those things that have creeped into our town, that we should be looking at the noise ordinance and what's acceptable under the noise ordinance, as well as continuing to make steps to go green. The other point that I think maybe the board can consider, and I think Dave can help with that, is because of some of the development things that have been going on for us, we've been getting a better education on what other towns have done, where you have, for your business districts, in keeping with the idea of colors and stuff, but there's actually a whole structure around an ordinance that looks at what's acceptable in a retail district and in an area. So a block of buildings could have a very similar look, which really actually adds to the presence and the feel of that, as it by being more coordinated versus just a hodgepodge of things that are invested. It also requires investment. So if someone is going to set up a business in town, they actually have to make an investment to make sure their building facade, is to a standard, so that it's just not anything goes. So I know that those exist, and I think with the nature of the redevelopment work that's going on, the overall attractiveness of the town, I think looking at what we can do to in that whole area around the code requirements around our business district, not just on Franklin Avenue, but we have about 570, 560 business properties in town on different streets and different areas. It would be very interesting to understand what we might want to set as a standard for how those buildings should look in town. So just that's another point, I think, that it's a more comprehensive look at certain of these areas.
Thank you. I think we have a lot to talk about for our next workshop meeting. Those are all very, very good suggestions. Are there any other comments? Anyone I'm not seeing? If not, Board of Ed folks, do you have a statement you would like to make? Is there anything?
Just a couple of things. Yeah, I took some notes just to bring everyone up to speed here on the different boards. We're in the process of updating our monthly report. We've still seen that our numbers 5 years ago where they trended today. We have not seen an overall increase in enrollment. It's been relatively stable. Over the past couple of years, there's been a very slight increase in the numbers. Not enough impacting our buildings in any way. We also had an uptick in our special education program. So we were hovering at about 15, 16% 5 years ago. That has now marked up to about 22%. So as many of you know, special education, we're not getting the same amount of children in the classroom. A lot of times we're getting 6 or 7 in each classroom with waivers. So that still continues to put pressure on our buildings. We're going to have to continue to look at different ways again to expand our footprint. That's got to be part of the conversation of the board moving forward. We're going to get to a point very soon with even trailers at some of our current buildings that have been there for a very long time. We've gone out for waivers on those, so they're going to need at some point to be replaced, which puts us in a position again to reinvest in trailers. So those are things that we're kind of diving into and figuring out ways to understand how we're going to be able to expand our footprint. I will say also any properties, and this is for planning, zoning, anytime that there is a property that increases the density within that area, it's very important, and we will always be able to explain and put our explanations in that any impact like that, where we're increasing the amount of residential space inside of a certain area, it's going to have an impact in some way, shape, or form, whether it's a year from now or 3 years from now. We are still seeing students coming out of those properties. So just be mindful of that. I know that a lot of situations in zoning, there's not much that we can do as the boards, but just be mindful that that is a continuing pressure for us. As that density continues in the community, we're going to still continue to see an influx of children. Aside from that, we're working on that demographic report, which should be final hopefully in the next few weeks. And we can certainly share that information amongst all bodies. We'll be doing a presentation as well at the board level. So aside from that, that's pretty much where we're at as far as just bringing everyone up to speed. Mr. Bania, the pizza, do you guys have anything to add to that?
I would just echo your special ed. We're seeing many more referrals come in our district, and those numbers are increasing throughout throughout the spring into the summer.
And I would just ask, when you have your demographics report ready, I think the board would like to hear from the board representative, John. That would be, if you have a copy, that would be great too. We'd like to hear from you guys on that.
Not a problem at all. I'll take a look at that, and once we have the final, we'll be sure it's here.
Any questions?
I just have a question for Mr. Banyan.
Sure.
I thought I just heard that the numbers are stable, and I know we recently took a hit on our funding, somewhere to the tune of like $418,000 because of the totally screwed up formula, all right? And I know there's a myriad of reasons, why they do things that they do, not all are very logical. But as part of that, wasn't one of the factors that enrollment was decreasing? Somewhere to the tune of like 147 children?
Mr. Bania.
Or was that incorrect? Because I thought that's the information that we got from the state of New Jersey.
So over the, what is the form that we use to process that as the
ASSA is submitted every October 15th.
So myself and Mr. Evans, Commissioner Evans, we've had several conversations surrounding this, and there are, it's just not one, that's one component of where the income comes out.
Correct.
The other components include the overall increase in income within the community, which has grown from, I believe, 1.2 billion to 1.5, correct, Commissioner Evans? Somewhere in that general area?
1.3 to 1.5.
Correct. So there is a forecast with the enrollment numbers that if they do see the numbers declining, that the forecast moving forward is that we're ultimately going to decline in the upcoming year, which does have an impact on our rate. We haven't gotten to October 15th yet to see where our numbers are going to be. But as of today's date or within the past few weeks, and I know we can check those numbers, we're still hovering within that 4,010. So,
Mr. Cartel is correct. We take an October snapshot and those numbers fluctuate over the year, especially with COVID and the pandemic, students going home, homeschooling, coming back to the district. Things of that nature.
So is the decrease that the state was talking about, was that a direct result of the pandemic, or are they wrong?
So we've actually done some research on what we've seen in student disenrollments during the pandemic. Mr. DePiece, are you familiar still with those numbers of what we uncovered with that investigation?
I thought we lost 84 students. I think the number was 84 students, and I believe 12 or 18, I don't remember the exact number. Let's use 15 as an average, came back into district.
Right. Where did the state get that 147 number?
Because in each of those reports on October 15th, as we put those numbers in, they're using just that one moment in time in the calculation of what our enrollment numbers are. And if they fluctuate throughout the year, if we pick up another 30 kids on October 16th, they don't get picked up until the following year. So you're using that one data point on our enrollment numbers on October 15th to forecast what the next year's budget surplus, or not surplus, but aid would be.
What that funding level should be, and I get that, and I also get that, there's a supplemental application that you could apply for. Trying to recoup that $418,000. I think everyone is on board to help however we plan to do that. But over the past several years, has the enrollment been decreasing? Because I know we're all sensitive, both boards and of course the Board of Ed, Board of Commissioners, on what we envision for the future of the town, and even as far as students are concerned. So we're very sensitive to that because we're not looking to overburden an already system that has building deficiencies, space-wise. All right. So has that number been going down, or has that number been stable?
I would describe the number as stable.
You would say the number is stable. Okay.
I would say the number's going down. If your ASSA it's a regression analysis that looks back over prior 5 years. And 5 years ago, it was a higher number than it is today. And it goes through a very complex calculation on how they forecast and what they think you're going to be come September, which is a hard thing for the school system because that number, is suggested that you'll be at 39, I think it was 3983. Dave, right? 3983 versus the 404 that was in your ASSA for November. And so because it's done, it's basically a regression analysis, right? So based upon a trend, they forecast that the trend will continue. And I suspect our trend is not going to continue that way. It's actually going to go up. So the next November, and Dave, you and I, we talked about this, the next submission will probably show an increase because one, COVID is passing, you're getting returning students. And so just, I think it's your trend, but it certainly is a decreasing trend. Is it a dramatic decreasing trend? Overall, probably not, but it is a decreasing trend.
Yeah, and I would tell you over that time span, if we had 150 that were removed from the district, if we could pick and choose who those, exactly what those 150 students were, it would actually have an impact on our, even on our spending ends, because we with 150 students, we did a reduction of 3 classrooms, right? Sure. But when you're spreading that 150 students out over 12 grades within the district, we're not closing out any classrooms. Some 1 or 2 grade levels may actually be closer to our best practice number. That we've had to increase, and we're still having a high level amount of students in classrooms. So we're somewhere between 27 and 30 in most situations.
I'm sorry, Ms. Grant, I can tell you that our best practice is, let's say, 24 in 6th grade. Right now, we're at 30 in 6th grade, right? We live with 25, that's our district standard. So, we're over all of our best practice numbers, all of our district guideline numbers right now. And if there is a decline, I don't know, to Danny's point, if that impact spread out across K through 12 will significantly reduce our need for teachers in classrooms.
Sure. But isn't the issue itself deeper than just how many kids are there?
Sure, it's the services we need to provide to those students that we're seeing. And that's why the special education number is a big factor in class.
When you think about, one, the overall, maturity of students today versus what they were back when I was in school, right? The overall depth and change in curricula since over the last, especially in the last 10 years versus the last 20 years on what has to be taught, the convergence of curricula between science and math, as well as English, and the expectations and certifications for teachers in those areas. All of that, going towards smaller classroom size. I don't think our schools are going to be managed by simply saying to the planning board, control the number of kids. We have a bigger issue. And when you think about, the John Walker Middle School is actually a junior high. It's only 2 years. It's not a 3-year system. So I think, significant investments that need to be thought through, and that we have to basically deliver on those for the benefit of our children.
Are there any other questions of Mr. Carnseller for any of the board members? I know. Is there anyone from the public who has questions regarding what we were just discussing? If not, we'll move on to the commissioners. Mayor, is there anything you would like to tell us today?
We are moving along in very unstable times. We have some pluses with our state aid, that it's been stabilized through the good work of Commissioner Evans and the rest of the commissioners. But with that came a little bit of rain. That cloud didn't have a total silver lining. While we've solidified the majority, he's laughing. While we solidified the majority of that aid, we were in fact cut, what, 1.2 million on the transitional aid?
Well, from where it was.
From where it was,
From the
right?
peak?
Yes.
From the peak, we were actually about 2 million more on average. So.
Okay, but in the latest, in the latest situation we were in, it's about what, 1.2 million?
No. The aid itself, the permanent aid was just for the temporary aid,
Right.
162,000.
I'm talking about total,
But
the total number.
That's it. That is the change. The rest of it you're referring to is because of the cuts that we had during COVID, we had to introduce revenue one-time revenue. And so that's the number
That built it. That's what we see. He knows. You couldn't hear me, you couldn't hear Commissioner Evans. There you go, to your point. We will speak loud. We're working through a lot of issues. It's no secret, we received some proposals for the redevelopment of the Chickalinny site that we're still reviewing. And we're investigating other developments in other places to see what the quality is and see what the design standards are and what we would like to see and what fits in Nutley, because we always look to maintain the character of our township and put something in that would stand out and be offensive. Pool Club, we're working through that. I'm sure everyone knows there was a lawsuit involved surrounding that going back many years. We're working through that. We're working through a bad budget year last year for a lot of reasons. Number one, the change in state aid, municipal tax appeals in the city of Newark, like that were granted. So the balance of those had to be spread amongst the other municipalities, and the assumption in the public safety department of the volunteer emergency squad. But I believe that we are at a point where, and no commissioners can chime in as necessary, that we're stabilizing those areas. We're looking for additional revenue sources. It's not an appropriation issue. It's a revenue issue, and our revenues are relatively stable, correct? So that's pretty much where we are on the Board of Commissioners. We've had a lot of questions. We try and answer them to the best of our ability. They're always honest. They may not be what people want to hear, but they're always the truth. Commissioners, anyone add anything?
Okay. I just like to add, maybe not a proper reading, but all the rules and regulations that is mandated on public safety and all the new bail reform that's out there, and the no chase policy. A couple of weeks ago, we had a stolen car, we pulled up on it, they run, we're not allowed to chase. So public safety does a great job. Even with the ambulance taking that over because of a lot of different factors, our response time hasn't not changed at all. We're not billing our residents for any additional charges with that. But if anybody could write letters to the senators, all these bill makers about this bail reform and chase policies, because unfortunately, we're not the only people receiving letters from the government. Apparently, bad guys have them too. So every night, please lock your car doors, pass the word along, because every night we have kids going through cars, and it is putting a lot of stress on our police department. So whatever everyone can do to pass the word along. Also, another thing that drives the public safety budget in my department is all the mandates from the state, all the trainings, all the new laws that are coming out, the cannabis, things like that. So I think as a municipality, we really need to hear from our residents to see what they want and what they want to stay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to go, we talked a little bit about impervious coverage and flooding, and I think Mayor mentioned rain. In light of our summer, last summer in Ida and a couple of the storms that we had, we're doing an H&H study, which is a hydraulic and hydrologic study of our stormwater system in the Third River. The mayor had a meeting with a couple of our surrounding municipalities. The Third River flows all the way to Woodland Park, Clifton, Little Falls, Montclair, Bloomfield, Belleville, before it gets to Nutley. So all that stormwater from those other towns are in the Third River before it gets here. So we're looking at that. We've cambered some of the areas where we've had some flooding, and we've identified some issues that we've corrected. And thus far on Bloomfield Avenue, where we had some flooding of the backyards and into the homes, we seem to, the last couple of storms, I had no issues down there. So we made some corrections there. There were some blockages. Mr. Ferraro, you can jump in at any time. He's our engineering coordinator besides being on the board there. And he's running the H&H study for at least overseeing it, and Pinoni's doing it. So.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, I mean, the hydraulic and hydrology study is very important because it's going to study our existing stormwater drainage system. It's going to review its capacity, conveyance capacity. It's going to analyze what storms, 2-year, 10-year, 25, all the way up to 500-year storm to see what capacity we have. Our system was designed and built, many decades ago. At a time when the town was not as developed as it is today. And things have been improved throughout the years, but as more of the impervious coverage, 70% is a big number. And all of that rainwater that comes from somebody's house or somebody's patio or somebody's driveway all ends up on the street, which all ends up into our system, which ultimately discharges to the 3 water bodies, mainly the Third River, St. Paul's Brook, which starts off over by the old former Hoffman Road area there, goes to Nicholas Park, and then eventually at the intersection of Rutgers and Passaic, that's where the 2 rivers merge. And then ultimately what that does is it ultimately discharges to the Passaic River. And so the Passaic River is tidal. So, several times throughout the day, that tide can fluctuate anywhere up to 3 feet. And during storm events, that can fluctuate a lot higher than that. So depending on when the storm occurs, you could have the tide that is high, and so the water is trying to get to the Passaic River. It's having a difficult time discharging to the Passaic River because of the hydrology of it. So that's where it starts backing up. We've started discussions with Essex County. They are looking to do some work at the bridge at Passaic and Rutgers. So we're talking to them about seeing if there's a way that we can realign those 2 rivers, because what's happening is St. Paul's Brook catches a lot of the runoff from Passaic, from Bluefield and from Clifton, and then ultimately not. So when that body of water reaches the Third River, you can see what happens. It almost creates a little turbulence area there. So if the county can do some realignment of that area there, that might allow water to discharge quicker, which then might help with it backing up with the waterhole and always having the issues in the park. But I think the most important thing is to start at the residential level as well, right? Some of the things that the zoning board is looking at and the planning board with on-site retention, those things help, right? You have over 9,300 properties in town. So if we start retaining a little bit of water throughout those 9,200 properties, that's going to ultimately help. It's not something you're going to see an effect of it tomorrow, but down the road you will. So those are some of the things that I think is important. That the H&H study, we believe our engineers will have that completed sometime this summer. They've just completed the surveying of it. All of the outfalls, those are all the discharge points where all of the storm systems discharge to the rivers. They surveyed all those points. They're going to map them, see what the elevations are. And then from there, they're actually going to model the system to see what areas may need to be tweaked. Hurricane Ida, that was, I think, one of those 500+ year storms. Those are the storms that are going to be very hard to stop. But the 20-year, the 50-year storms, 100-year storms, all the ones that, we're going to see if there's ways that we can tweak the system to help some of the flooding.
And that's why I hired Mr. Ferraro.
Any other comments? Is there anyone from the public who has a question? Yes.
Could somebody
Could you
clarify?
please step up to the podium?
Could someone clarify?
Hold on a moment, please. Step up to the podium. Please state your name and address for the record.
Carmine Alessio, 81 East Center Street. Could somebody clarify transitional state aid regarding this year? I'm getting a lot of feedback from Belleville
as to why Belleville's getting like 495,000 and we're getting like 7,000, something to that effect as far as the price goes.
Would you like to answer that?
Carmen, as regards to transitional state aid, temporary aid, Nutley is not getting any more, we didn't get any transitional aid this year. Because last year we were able to convert our temporary aid to 2.6 million in permanent aid. So we now have, in fact, by doing that, it basically almost doubles the amount of state aid that we receive.
I'm aware that we had 28 million of state aid throughout since 2014.
Correct. And
we kind of like use that all up, but this is a separate entity type of aid that Belleville's getting 495,000 for their school system, something to that effect, and we're only getting 7,000. Unless the figures are wrong, but I doubt it because I kind of looked into it, and I was under the impression that when the census went around, we had 30,000 people that were supposed to be living in our town. Maybe the census has something to do with it because Belleville has like 36 36,000, yeah. And we have, right now, when you check the figures out, we're down to under 28,000. And Belleville has, and I think that's what they base it on. So, we were all under the impression we had like 30,000 people in Nutley, but it kind of slipped low. So I think that has some kind of reasoning why we're not getting this aid because of that. If you check the computer, we fall under a V 2022 like category, which kind of like nullifies some of the stuff. So the thing that I'm trying to point out here is why is Belleville getting all of this, money and we're not getting anything?
So Carmen, when it comes to municipal aid, so municipality to municipality, separate from school aid, right? Municipality to municipality. When you compare Nutley to Belleville, we're very close now with the permanent aid we receive. We're pretty close. There are differences, and this is in terms of permanent aid. The transitional aid, I don't believe Belleville made an application for a TSA this year. But when you look at it, when they consider aid for a municipality, they consider the assessable value of property. So what's it worth? The property value is worth in town, as well as the income of the town. And when you compare Nutley to Belleville, our community income is higher by about a third, and our assessable value is higher by about $1 billion. When you look at then the population comparisons, and you look at the school enrollments, there are differentials in the school enrollment because there are significant factors in addition to that, which deals with the number of students in the school system in Belleville that are at risk, and as it's defined under the law. And I won't step into school aid calculation or the determination, but there are these very significant differences. And to that degree, Belleville receives significantly more school aid than Nutley does because of primarily the socioeconomic differences of the two communities.
Okay, but you did mention population too. That's what I heard you say.
Yeah.
It has something to do with population.
Yeah, so we have fewer people than they do. So in fact, technically they would define it as us. We have higher values of our property, more income on average per home, and fewer people would define for them that we would need less aid.
I'm not going to get into a debate about this, but
I'm not debating.
Thank you very much. I think we've kind of exhausted this subject.
Well, I don't think so. Why are we falling under the V 2022 when?
Actually, we have a 3 minute.
Could you explain it?
minimum here, and you
Could
kind
you
of
explain
exceeded
that? Could you explain that?
So I'd like to get the next person up. Thank you so much for your comments. Dave, do you have anything that you want to
Sure.
address?
It's going to be pretty easy for me tonight because the chairman checked off a lot of my marks there. Validated the commissioners did. I mean, last year, you want to hear me. Last year, we met with the zoning committee with the planning board, thank you. And we went over a lot of really crucial items that in the zoning that need to be changed. Since then, I drafted some ordinances. Sal offered to help me. And in the next coming months, we're going to be looking to get that to the board for you guys to review. If you do want to have a workshop before then, I would be more than glad to be available to maybe go over a draft. And a lot of the items that the chairman brought up, I have on a list here, but I'm not going to be redundant. I strongly agree about the air conditioning condensers. We have some board members who are mechanical contractors. I speak to mechanical contractors all day long. I talk to other code officials. A long time ago, the units were loud. Now they're much quieter. Now some of these units even get attached to houses. So I think it's a good idea for us to talk about that. Basement alterations, we always get these discussions with applicants. They want to do all this jazz in a basement. Our ordinance is so unclear about what you could do in a basement. COVID happened. Everybody's working from home. Everybody wants to make an office, right? Well, an office today is what tomorrow? It's a bedroom. It is. I mean, so that's on one of the top of my list. Driveways is something that I'm always discussing with the zoning board. Pools attached to decks, a common variance for the board. All residents want to come out their backyard, they want to come onto their deck, and they want to come onto a pool. The way our ordinance addresses, every time you attach something to the house, it becomes part of the house. If you attach me to the house, I'm the house, a pool to the house, a shed. So it drives people crazy, and many of the variances get granted. Sal and Dr. Joe were talking about stormwater, and so did the chairman. It's a really big issue in town. What the storm that happened last year brought a lot of damage to our devastating, worst damage we've ever seen. It also was an eye opener to development applications. Everybody's doing a lot of development all over North Jersey. Nutley, they're putting in these built-in pools, they're putting in backyards, they're filling everything up. And when that happens, all that water runs off. So we're trying to be proactive, and we're trying to work with every applicant. Sal works with me on every application for a 1 and 2 family, for new additions and pools. And it would be really helpful if we had some ordinances like some other towns have that address smaller improvements, like 1 and 2 family houses. So we're researching some ordinances from some other towns, and Sal's going to be working on something for 1 and 2 family houses. We don't really have to worry about the big applications, the site plans, because you see a lot of the applications they're proposing to do drainage, and that's not really a concern. So I really feel that's an important item. The chairman brought up something that I didn't write it down here, but as soon as I heard it, I said, I have to discuss this. And my commissioner will be happy I'm doing this. Trash, recycling, all this stuff. Our ordinance is not silent, but it's not where it needs to be. Our ordinance in the site plan ordinance definitely discusses that you have to build an enclosure. So an application comes in, the engineer reads the site plan ordinance, and he identifies, yeah, nothing wants to say it's an enclosure. What's an enclosure need to be? Well, it doesn't tell you, but you know, engineering wise, it's usually like a standard. If you build a concrete slab, you cover it, you put a fence up, and that's the enclosure. What I've learned over the past couple of years, because of a couple of really big problems that we've been having, how much garbage do you need? How much recycling do you need? How many containers do you need? It's a big problem. We've had a couple of addresses in town that have been some mammoth problems. They go to the commissioner, they're complaining, and this is an important item. It's an important item on 2 parts. one, new applications, but two, an older application, a pre-existing restaurant, a pre-existing apartment building. There's nothing in our world, in our code that addresses, that allows me even to enforce, even to like help out somebody with a complaint, because there's nothing in there. Some of these properties are really old. They're so old. They've been there forever. Some of these apartment buildings have been there for 80 years. Things were different back then. It would be very helpful if we had some language on that. Very helpful. Commissioner Evans brought up something, another thing. Noise. We were talking about blowers, backpack blowers. I happened to look at our ordinance before I came here. We do have an ordinance, number 460, and it actually even talks about a backpack blower. And it's really old. But when I read it, I'm looking at it and I'm like, how do you enforce it? So we do have one, number 460. Everyone could look at it. You could see it's an ordinance. It's on the books. It talks about loudness. It even talks about blowers, about combustion motors. And I'm looking at it like, how would we enforce this? But we have it on the books. So it's just a thought. Our code department, and my commissioner mentioned to me earlier that he even gets a lot of complaints about noise. And I was talking to Carl on the way here. He said, Dave, I'm getting complaints all the time about these blowers and loud equipment. And I said, I'm just going to mention it. Carl was a code official up in Essex Fells. Essex Fells passed an ordinance about blowers and when you can use them and when you can't use them on a Sunday. And it seemed to help a little bit. At least there was something on the books. The mayor brought up something about families and occupancy and living together. And we happen to have a pretty sharp architect here who I'm working with something right now. And I bet you might even reiterate, I'm seeing a much more ask nowadays for families who want to live with families. I'm getting calls all the time. My parents are getting old. They have nowhere to go and they want to move in. And architects like this are coming to talk to zoning officials. So I have a mom and dad, they're selling their house, they're downsizing, they have nowhere to go and they want to, build an addition and they want to build this. And then we're like analyzing dwelling unit definitions and, well, you can do this and you can't do this. And our town has no ordinance and nor ever had an ordinance on mother and daughters. There's nothing. Pat even reader, there's nothing. It never did. There's no such thing as a mother-daughter in nothing. So when architects want to design these spaces for people to live together, they have to be open. All open, no separation. And then you technically could have families living together. It's something that I'm seeing it more and more now. I mean, I don't know, maybe because the cost of living, people want to sell their house and, young people can't buy a house and they want to move into their dad's house, like stuff like that. So it's just some stuff that's really happening in our world right now. So I could spend another hour here probably, but and it's been crazy at code enforcement. I mean, we've been out of control since COVID happened. We've never stopped. We were, the world was shut down. We were out there inspecting. We were taking applications in. We're trying to figure out a way to take construction permits in with mail, but we did it. So it wasn't easy. So if anybody has any questions.
Dave, I'm sorry, on the subject of trash and recycling, some of the communities that I work in, they ask for annual estimates to be on forms to be sent in. So that an existing property or
yeah, well, a quick way that might make it, a quick thought right here, I'm thinking right now how it might help is we have a site plan ordinance and it's a requirement in our site plan ordinance to probably add some language in there to submit. This way the township engineer, when he gets a review, he could review the amount of consumption that you need or, some properties have dumpsters, some properties have cans, Sal will tell you, him and I, we worked together on an apartment building who had like 22 recycling cans all set up. And these crappy dumpsters that were set up, there was holes in the bottom of them. The rats were coming out like crazy. And, you know, him and I are going like, well, how are we gonna fix this? This is a major problem. We got through it, we're fixing it, we're, you know, it's a good story, but it would be easier if maybe we had some better, you know, guidance on how to handle, you know, think about it, you're building 50 units. How much garbage do you need for 50 units? Do you know? I don't.
Well, that's what I was saying.
I don't. How many
We have to-
recycling, if you're building 50 apartment buildings, how much of a recycling area do you need? Like, these are things that I never thought about until I dealt with this problem.
We have to anticipate. that sort of-
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
there is a calculation for it.
if there is, I would love to talk to Sal and incorporate that into our site plan ordinance.
There's average calculations for, you know, the world is changing, right? I mean, you know, you look at recycling, there's hardwood recycling, it's, you know, paper, there's very minimal newspaper, it's mainly cardboard, Amazon, all the deliveries. So things change, right? The boxes are bigger.
Right.
Nobody, I mean, you know, COVID, we couldn't go to the store, so a lot of ordering was done online.
And also too, when I was talking to Meredith at the health department, you know, there it's unclear who picks up and who pays for their, you know, the refuse, for the garbage, you know. Some properties do, some properties get their own. It's a little unclear on, you know, on who does that for like the commercial property.
The haulers know how much they're pulling out of each place.
Yeah.
So if the onus is put on the owner, that they get the report from the contractor, then they're able to.
Well, I'm talking about like in the beginning, like you're the engineer, you're designing this mixed use building, you know, you go to Nutley's ordinance, Nutley said, okay, you gotta build an enclosure. Like, how much, how big? It was the same thing, somebody brought up the Amazon, those Amazon lockers. You know, I issued
There would have to be a similar development that's been here for 5 years, and you can get an idea from them. What was the average per year over the last 5 years?
Yeah.
I guess kind of calculate it that way.
a start would be something, just something.
Yeah.
Something other than you're required to build the enclosure would probably be helpful. And then an idea, what do you do to a pre-existing space? Like a modification and maybe a property maintenance code, I don't know, I have to get creative with that somehow. Yeah, it's the only thing I can say.
I wanted to ask you about because you talked about this, the condensers and the stuff on the side of the house. So when we see, I was at that, so
yeah,
marathon meeting. I was thinking that obviously the biggest issue is if it's 6 or 7 foot setback on one side, that's where you want to put it. And like you said before, they're quieter now and they're smaller, they take up less space. If we could come up with what the minimum requirement would be from the apparatus. But I think involved in that conversation, you might want to be somebody from the fire department. What do you think is the minimum safe so the fire can get back here if necessary?
We would have to, obviously, that's where I would go to first. That would be my first thought process into, you know, what's the required means of egress for a one-family house? It's 36 inches, so then you'd have to have 36 inches. If it was a commercial building, maybe the egress requirement is more for a commercial building. You have to use that kind of thought.
The fire department would be helpful in that, in some kind of.
That's the reason why this code is in effect. That's why this was in effect. That always told me, you know, you have to have an unobstructed side yard, because he was a fire, you know, he was on a fire commission. Firemen come, it's pitch black. They're fighting a fire, they're running to the back of the house. So that's the reason. So that's an important, you know, thing to think about. 4 foot, I don't know, something, you know.
You also might only need one side.
Well, you're the air conditioning master, so
we
you're
only-
just giving insight to everybody.
No, what I'm saying is,
If
I
you
don't
fix this,
know
I'm
the
definitely
fire,
not
I don't know the
let's go ahead.
fire code, but I just think if you have egress into the yard from one side, that's enough. So.
Yeah, but the problem is you don't know when you're a fireman and you're going to that house and it's all, you know, crazy. You're going in every different direction. You're actually running over stuff, so, you know.
So I mean, I guess one of the things you can put in there, as long as there's no fence or something
Yeah.
between the two properties, because you really could just run on the other person's property.
You're right, not
to go
every
around
house
it.
has a side yard on both sides either, so.
Right, yeah, so it's,
Yeah.
like you said, the original reason it was created was because of
Yeah.
noise. And the noise problem is pretty much kind of.
I don't know, is the noise a problem anymore? Like, it seems like it's.
They're
They're
quiet.
Yeah, I put these mini split units on my house and the air guy wanted to put them on the side and I only have 3 foot.
So the guy says to me, just put them on 3 foot, that's what everybody goes, I can't do that, I'm the code official. And it's so quiet, and it attaches to the, you would never know it's there.
No, I mean,
So
they can
it's
get
something,
ultra quiet.
we spoke about it in the past, it's something that's really important. And these air conditioners, they get put in without permits. The zoning board gets a lot of these, you guys are right. And they get put in without permits on a Saturday afternoon, oh, I didn't know, they get put in the wrong spot. It would help out a lot of people, I think. So,
Any other
Anybody?
questions, comments?
anything else, boss?
Thanks, Dave. We have a lot to talk about in our next
Okay.
workshop. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments?
You're welcome.
from Any of the board members? Any other comments or questions from anyone from the public? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I think you had something.
Oh,
I want a motion.
Oh.
Until the meeting around, you get my 2 cents in. I wonder why. Well, Dave Perry just mentioned about the landscape noise. We do have a lot of landscapers in town, and I would have to agree that a lot are professional, but a lot aren't. So there is a noise ordinance, and we do have an ordinance as far as landscapers. They're supposed to leave their name and addresses, if they work in town. And I don't think that has been fulfilled because, like I said, there's a lot of them around. And these people that are around are like what we would call fly-by-nights. This is my forte. I've been in business for like 35 years. And it's obvious. Now, a good landscaper would have state-of-the-art blowers. He knows how to use the equipment. He'll only use the blower for 2 minutes, and he knows what he's doing. Now, if we have these ordinances on the books as far as keeping a record of the landscapers in town, it's certainly not enforced. Okay, same thing with the pesticide applicators, licensing, the town, the county, they're supposed to enforce these things, which they don't. And the guy who's out there trying to drum up business and do business, he's paying his sales taxes, he's doing everything appropriately. He has to watch somebody putting pesticides and things like that on the lawn in front of them, and these people are not certified and they're not like licensed, nor do they have the proper vehicles to do this job with. Like, you have to have commercial plates, you have to have names on the side of your vehicle. And, I just wanted to bring that forth because of what Mr. Berry just said in regards to the blowers and as far as side yard for the firemen to get access to in case of a fire. We have a planning board right here. I'd like to know, in one instance, down by me on East Center Street, 113, the apartments were built there. I actually sat through meetings to where it was going to be a gated community, and the end result happened to be apartments. And I take issue with that because as time went on, Washington schools getting overcrowded, and our superintendent actually stated on the record that she would not have one more student enrolled at Washington schools. So I'm sitting there and I'm like kind of a Nutleyite, and I'm reading all this stuff and checking everything out. And I noticed that the apartments behind the Center Street, they got a CO for 18 2-bedrooms, when in fact, they were supposed to be 1-bedroom. Oh, okay, so, the code enforcer looked the other way. How many times is he gonna look the other way?
Mr. DeLassio, thank you for your comments. You've exceeded your time. and we need to move on. Thank you.
Can someone give me some
Thank
kind of an
you.
answer?
I don't think there's any.
Isn't that what this community gathering
I
is
don't
for,
think
to
there's
have
an
your
answer
answer?
to something that happened
I was,
in the
could you
past.
allow me 2 minutes for someone who's not, so I
I
can
don't think that
conclude?
anyone has,
I'd like to
you know,
conclude,
commented.
please.
No, thank you very much for your comments.
You're welcome.
Is there anything else to come before, any of the boards this evening?
I would just like to thank Mr. Graziano for the government, the time and help.
Stand up.
It was very helpful and it was very directed and will lead to a lot of discussion at our next workshop session. Thank you. It was obviously a lot of work.
Yes. State your name and
My
address
name is
for the
Carla
record.
Garcia. I live at 499 Center Street. And my question is kind of two parts. So you guys talked a lot about the flooding, and it's really refreshing and positive to hear that there's things being done to look into how to fix it. In the interim, what can the town do in order to help the residents prepare or help in the event of an Ida again? Because it was pretty bad. I mean, we were very lucky, but we didn't get hit, but we helped a lot of families that did. And it was quite devastating to see, you know, a lot of the damage, homes lost, people crying. From my perspective, in my opinion only, and I don't know if maybe I wasn't informed, but it just seemed like there was a lot of like people in the community doing a lot of their outreach and helping. I don't know what support came from the town in early stages and what could maybe be done next time to help or prevent or prepare. That's my important question.
Mayor, do you want to?
Yeah,
Commissioner?
actually, many people were in fact devastated, and you know, throughout the town, Harrison Street, Elm Place, you know, we can go through the list. You know, it goes on, Passaic Avenue. What we did was we sponsored many of the helping agencies, FEMA and the SBA, and quite frankly, I was a little disappointed in that response and what the requirements were for a lot of folks. But we were there to lend the technical assistance to help them fill out the different applications and different forms that they needed. Some folks did okay, all right. Others didn't do so well. Some things were covered, others were not. I mean, I was at Lorraine's house and Dan's house, you know, where, you know, the water was, you know, up to the basement, and, you know, they were there pretty much helping themselves. All right, so we did what we could. We reached out to the county folks. We had county folks here. We had SBA folks here. We had FEMA folks here. We had state folks here. We pulled in everyone we could have. Just that sometimes their regulations and their guidelines are so onerous that the people that really need a substantial amount of help don't always get what they should. But there was pretty much not anything left for us to do. We wish there was something else for us to do. We would have been more than happy to jump in. But we did everything that we could as far as state and local funding agencies are concerned.
No, I
You know, fees were relaxed. I know in code enforcement, we weren't collecting anything. You know, just like during COVID, where people were, you know, pretty much secluded in their homes, you know. In the Parks Department, we were delivering recreational equipment so that they could recreate at home in their backyards if they needed bats, balls, whatever we could do to help, you know, we were there to help. But unfortunately, the devastation that we suffered during that period was so severe that a lot of people were hurt.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Mr. Mayor. I mean, maybe if in the future there's something we could do to maybe help out that initial response, like when we know it's going to happen, because seeing all that devastation was really heartbreaking. And I felt like even myself just delivering supplies and helping with a bunch of other volunteers in the community just wasn't enough, you know, and it was heartbreaking. I'm going back to my nice, clean, warm house, you know, so maybe just food for thought.
If I could just jump in, just so you know, too, public safety that night, obviously was out in force. Rescued, I think it was 47 people from 821 down by the bakery on Franklin Avenue. Parks. We had you know, a warming shelter set up with the help of my commissioners. We pumped out thousands, I don't know, probably not thousands, but hundreds of basements. You know, but the thing with that storm is that I just like to add is that when you get that much rain, and I've lived in Nutley my whole life, I don't know that there's a solution to the problem. With 10 inches of rain, was it 2 hours?
Well, the river rose what? How many feet?
8 feet.
Yeah,
10 feet.
you know,
I mean,
and then
There's
we
nothing
have,
we can do.
then we have been following up, you know, with those streets that you and I walk together, you know, to try to help them get the garbage collected as quick as possible, pump out basements, all that stuff. But, you know, you have to realize too, there's 30,000 people. I think there's 8,000 homes here. You know, we have, you know, limited resources ourselves, but I can tell you that we were all in that night, you know, and compared to some other towns, our recovery was a lot better, I would think.
Thank you.
Just as an aside, we also had folks from the DPW and the Parks Department actually rescuing people.
Oh, okay. Yeah, see, this is why I wanted to talk about it too, because I had no idea,
Backhoes.
you know, I didn't even know. Oh,
In
well, that's great.
in addition, the DPW garage had 4 feet of water in it, so we were operating.
It was totally decimated.
They were
And so the public
operating and
safety-
doing that, and we're just getting back to normal in the garage. So, you know, we lost equipment, we lost files, we lost furniture. All that has to be replaced, but in the meantime, while that happened in July,
August, September.
September, we continue to operate, pick up the recycling, do all the things that we have to do. I think that, and at the same time, trying to rebuild. So it's, that night, I think we were out everywhere. Just, you're never gonna, I think the Commissioner Chaco said, that amount of rain, there's nothing, no way we could prepare for that and the amount of rain that came and the rising of the river that quickly.
And then 2 weeks later, it came again, right? Yeah, more.
And the Board of Ed, let's not leave the Board of Ed. The Board of Ed opened up their facilities, all right, so that we could utilize those as shelters for folks that didn't have any place to go.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
That's great.
I think also the storm that night, the storm was predicted not to be that massive of a storm, right? I mean, they were saying it was gonna be 4 inches over a 24-hour period. When we ended up getting, I mean, we have cameras down at the DPW garage, and the cameras actually saw within a half hour, the water's rising from, you could see the bottom of one of the vehicle's tires to where you couldn't see the door. And that happened in a 30-minute period. So in Bloomfield, there's actually a monitor in the in 30 minutes, it went from a 2-foot level to a 10-foot level. That's in 30 minutes. And that's, you know, the third river that comes to town.
We all share.
Thank you. That's why I wanted to bring it up too, because I didn't want to have misconceptions and the wrong information. So thank you. Thank you very much.
If there's nothing else coming for the board, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor?